I will be on Outnumbered at noon on Fox News and Boothe on Fox Business at 1:30.
This is a Fox News alert. President Trump charting a new course for 2018 as an ambitious GOP agenda is taking shape, and Republicans from the president on down call for Democrats to come to the table in the new year. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kennedy, and here today we've got Republican strategist and Fox News contributor Lisa Boothe on the couch, along with National Review reporter Katherine Timpf and Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov. And joining us on the couch today, nationally syndicated radio host of the Buck Sexton Show and former CIA analyst, Buck Sexton is here, and he is outnumbered. Happy Boxing Day to you, Buck.
Yeah, Merry Christmas. I feel like we got a few more days of Merry Christmas going, as well as Boxing Day.
I think it's going to be every day now, forever, because of President Trump. So
yeah,
we'll carry on.
Now we can say it again. Now Obama can't stop us from saying Merry Christmas anymore.
He made Christmas great again, and now we're all celebrating for a week.
Well, now that we've got Buck on the couch, let's celebrate bigly. President Trump celebrating the holidays at the Winter White House in Mar-a-Lago, tweeting on Christmas Day, quote, "I hope everyone is having a great Christmas. Then tomorrow it's back to work in order to make America great again," which is happening faster than anyone anticipated. Central to the Republican message in 2018 is a call for Democrats to join Republicans in getting things done. Here's Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and the president.
I really do believe we're going to have a lot of bipartisan work done, and maybe we start with infrastructure, because I really believe infrastructure can be bipartisan.
Well, I think one thing I can say about this year, it was pretty partisan. I don't think most of our Democratic colleagues want to do nothing, and there are areas, I think, where we can get bipartisan agreement.
Democratic Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland says that his party will know very soon whether or not this new call for bipartisanship will work.
The way the budget is handled, I think, will be an indicator of whether we can have bipartisan cooperation. It's not just the budget for the year. We have disaster relief for the people of Texas and Florida, California, and Puerto Rico. We have the immigration issues that need to be dealt with now. And I think the manner in which that is handled can set the stage for Congress, Democrats and Republicans working together. Or if they can't, if the president won't work with us on that, it's going to be a tough year.
Rich Edson is live from West Palm Beach. Rich, it looks nice and toasty warm there. I'm so jealous.
It is very nice here. A little cloudy this morning. I don't want to complain, but it got nicer throughout the day, and that's probably why the president is out playing a little golf right now. So these consultations on what the administration and the Republicans in the House and Senate are going to try to push next year really begin in the next few weeks, but maybe an early preview of that today as the president is golfing with Senator David Perdue of Georgia. He's also got a couple of professionals with him as well. PGA Tour player Bryson DeChambeau and former PGA golfer Dana Quigley are joining the two. Deeper discussions will, though, begin in a couple of weeks. That includes health care. Earlier today, the president tweeted, quote, "Based on the fact that the very unfair and unpopular individual mandate has been terminated as part of our tax cut bill, which essentially repeals overtime Obamacare, the Democrats and Republicans will eventually come together and develop a great new health care plan." The president has also invited the Senate Majority Leader, the House Speaker Paul Ryan, to Camp David in the first weekend in January to begin discussions on a number of different items that they're going to work on. Health care is one of them, but they'll also talk infrastructure. The president has been touting infrastructure, pushing for an infrastructure plan well into his candidacy for the presidency, and now in the second year of his term, he is looking to actually get something done on that, perhaps of a price tag of $1 trillion, but those details are really outstanding. How much is the federal government going to pay? How much are state and local governments going to pick up? And the federal portion of that, how exactly is the United States, with its $20 trillion in debt, going to pay for all of that? So those are consultations that will begin first off on the Republican side early part of the year. But you've heard from Democrats that they're interested in infrastructure. It's something they wanted to do in the Obama administration. It's something they're even saying now during the Trump administration that they want to begin to push and work on. But all those details are outstanding in the early part of the year. There's this hopefulness around some bit of bipartisanship. That usually happens in the beginning of legislative sessions or beginning of legislative years and then quickly falls apart. But it's unclear. We'll have to see the details first. There are a number of other issues that have to work on as well. There's disaster relief spending that still has to pass the full Congress. Also issues on immigration. Remember the so-called DACA or Dreamers, those who were brought to this country illegally by their parents. Many of them are adults now. So those have to be worked out, and Republicans and the president are starting to scheme on that. Back to you.
All right, Rich Edson, thanks so much. Cloudy. I'll give you cloudy. All right, so let's discuss this a little bit, Buck, because the Republicans obviously have a huge win in passing tax reform and the president signing it into law. What momentum does that do to the talk on infrastructure?
It creates a total narrative shift. Now the Republicans going into the midterms get to say, we do stuff. We have points on the board. We're giving the American people back money. We're boosting the economy. We want to work with Democrats. We would like to find some way to do more good stuff like tax cuts, like tax reform for the American people. Democrats run around screaming about Russia and collusion and impeachment and all that. That's not going to get anybody who's a persuadable voter, anybody who is on the fence, to vote for them in the midterms. So I think it forces Democrats to have to be willing, at least in the early stages, I think that reporter was correct when he said it'll fall apart, to try and work with Republicans, which means that they may actually be able to get more agenda items through.
So infrastructure, obviously, this is an area where, for libertarians like Kat and I, it gives us the yips and the vapors.
Yeah,
because you end up spending so much money, which we simply don't have right now. But the idea of spending free money is so intoxicating for Democrats. How can your party possibly resist the president reaching out with a giant infrastructure plan?
Well, I don't think that we should. And I also think that Republicans nowadays are intoxicated by it as well. And I know you guys are equal opportunity haters, which I enjoy about both of you.
Thank you.
No, I think that infrastructure is a must-do. But if you notice that Senator Cardin also mentioned immigration reform, and by that he really meant DACA. So I think that that's going to be the first sticking point for Democrats. They're going to say if they don't get a solution for these 800,000 dreamers, they're not going to do anything. And we were talking about this last week. I think that that would be #1 on the agenda item. That is showing up in town halls.
But Democrats don't get to set the agenda. That's the unfortunate thing. So if infrastructure is next, will Democrats play ball?
Oh, yes. I think that they absolutely will. I think that if Paul Ryan stops talking about entitlement reform and lets that breathe, I think President Trump is spot on to say infrastructure first, and then let's get to more things that Democrats are more fundamentally opposed to.
You can't spend money on everything, though. You can't possibly have an increase in the Defense Department, a $1 trillion infrastructure plan, tax cuts, and really no way to pay for them. So what do Republicans do here to make sure the economy is safe long term? What
they should do is talk about spending cuts, but they're not going to do that because that's not popular. The fact that a Republican president is touting infrastructure reform, I'm sitting here wondering, what is being a Republican anymore? It's certainly not about being fiscally conservative, because in the past, we didn't even used to talk about tax cuts in the Republican Party without talking about spending cuts. Clearly, that's not an issue anymore. I do think that Republicans will cooperate, and I think that Democrats will cooperate, but I don't think that that's a good thing here. I think that that's a sad thing here, because there's nobody who's concerned about the purse strings anymore.
Yeah, but why don't Republicans talk about ways of improving infrastructure without spending $1 trillion?
That's a good question. I don't know if that's going to be in consideration, unfortunately, heading into this conversation with Republicans and Democrats. And you really can't address the spending issues unless you really want to tackle entitlement reform, which there doesn't seem to be a stomach with Republicans.
Is Paul Ryan just talking a big game when he talks about cutting entitlements and reforming the system that is so overwrought?
But I also think that he recognizes that it's not going to get done, and so it's a non-issue, right? It's a non-starter. It's not something that's going to happen, so I think that's why they're moving on. But I do think Buck is right earlier in saying that Republicans do have some momentum here, and I think Democrats really wanted to head into 2018 with the talking point that Republicans can't govern. Getting the tax reform law removes that from the equation, and there are already a few issues coming up where I do think there could be some bipartisanship. As Jessica pointed out, infrastructure, DACA, which they have until March to address. I do think there's enough Republicans and Democrats on board with that. Sexual harassment, changing the way that Congress deals with those issues on Capitol Hill.
And there have been lawmakers from both parties who have been very vocal about some of the changes that are absolutely necessary.
And lastly, one other is the Obamacare subsidies, where we've already had an agreement between Senators Alexander and Murray as well. So that's another issue.
You can't talk you can't talk about entitlement reform. You can't talk about trimming infrastructure. You can't talk about
the messenger.
without.
I'm simply talking about
that doesn't do any good, and it's contrary. So, what kind of a political win is passing an infrastructure package? Does that resonate with voters? I mean, are bridges as sexy as tax cuts and getting more money back?
I don't think that anybody honestly knows at this point, because if the Democrats play along, at least ostensibly, you may have a bipartisan massive addition, by the way, if it's $1 trillion that actually goes on into the debt, and that could be a problem with the GOP base. I actually think, though, the most dangerous place for Republicans is going to be with Obamacare, because they're talking about how the long-term repeal will happen because of the repeal of the individual mandate, the long-term removal of the bill overall. But the Democrats are just going to say they sabotaged it, and then they're going to be trying to hold Republicans up and say they
when it was getting more popular.
So I worry that, given what we saw last summer, where Republicans actually didn't really want to just get rid of Obamacare.
Yeah, but that goes to your point. That goes to your point, Kat, that what does it mean to be a Republican, especially in health care? That's where you have the greatest chasm. That's where you have the biggest divide. And you have people like Senators Collins and Murkowski who really have fallen in love with this government-mandated health care system. And then you have others like Rand Paul and Mike Lee who are really trying to get government out of health care.
Right.
So where does it end?
I think that there's a huge identity crisis in the GOP, because there are still a couple people who seem to care about spending, but not that many. It seems that when you're in the government, what you do is you hang out and you think about all these new ways to spend more money, and not any ways about how you're going to actually get that money. I spend zero time thinking about bridges every day. I think about bridges not at all. I'm not a bridge voter, and I don't think a lot of people are bridge voters.
That's the question, though. It could be a win for Republicans, but at what cost?
But the rift that you pointed out, Kenny, I mean, these rifts have long existed in the Republican Party. The Republican Party has long been divided, just as the Democratic Party has long been divided. Even we saw with the Democratic primary between the Bernie Sanders wing of the party and Hillary Clinton as well. So, you know, these are issues we're long going to be discussing.
That's not reconciled. It's all still a mess. Maybe it's time for more than two parties. The party is right here on the couch, and we are getting conflicting signals on the future course of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. But one Trump lawyer says he expects the whole thing to wrap up soon. Is he right? Plus, there are new questions whether the biggest surprise out of 2018 does not come from Robert Mueller at all, but from another investigation that's been underway for nearly a year involving Hillary Clinton. More on that in moments from the couch.
Welcome back. Well, there are conflicting signals as the administration heads into 2018 with the result of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe looming. The president's lawyers expect the probe's focus on President Trump to wrap up soon. Meanwhile, the president's critics think that he's giving investigators new reasons to pursue an obstruction of justice charge. Just this weekend, the president was going after Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe. McCabe was among a small group of FBI officials who drafted the final memo exonerating Hillary Clinton. The president tweeted, "How can FBI Director Andrew McCabe, the man in charge, along with Leakin James Comey, of the phony Hillary Clinton investigation, including her 33,000 illegally deleted emails, be given $700,000 for wife's campaign by Clinton puppets during investigation?" Richard Painter, a top ethics lawyer, believes that President Trump is making Robert Mueller's job easier with his attacks. He tweeted using Twitter on Christmas Eve to intimidate a witness, McCabe, and a criminal investigation is not a very Christian way to celebrate the holiday. But does this make Mr. Mueller's job easier? And that's a nice thing to do. Merry Christmas. So, Boothe, I want to get to President Trump's critics with some of these recent tweets that we saw, obviously saying it's not a very nice thing to do on Christmas Eve. But do those tweets have any bearing over this investigation? What do you think? No,
I think that at the end of the year, we saw some real signs that top leadership at the FBI is in for a rough 2018. Now, it's very important to distinguish. We're not talking about the whole FBI. People use the FBI as a shorthand. This is a few individuals in very key nodes of both the Hillary Clinton email investigation and the Russia collusion investigation. And somehow the politicization, or at least the appearance of it, the possibility of it, always goes against Trump. And we've seen this now with the text messages from FBI agent Strzok as well as others. And so Trump tweeting out about this is just stating what I think a lot of people already believe, which is that we need to investigate the investigators, and that's what 2018 is looking to be about. Not much of this Russia collusion leading to impeachment stuff that we've been hearing so much about in recent months.
Yeah, and Jessica, do you think, as a Democrat, I mean, do you have any concerns about political bias seeping into this investigation with President Trump? Obviously, there's been the text message exchange between Peter Strzok, Lisa Page. Yeah. You know, I mean, do you have any concerns about potential bias seeping in and you know, maybe clouding this investigation?
Well, I absolutely did with the Peter Strzok text messages, and I think everybody appreciated that he was removed from the probe immediately when those came to light, and that Bob Mueller just said, got to get out of here. This is not what should be going on. I think that's alarming for everybody, but I think, you know, we're all old enough to remember the 2016 election and what happened when Jim Comey came out just days before the election talking about what was on Huma Abedin's laptop and what Anthony Weiner must have seen, and there are a lot of people who argue that if you want to pinpoint one event that actually cost Hillary Clinton the election, it was what Jim Comey did. We know that the FBI
so do you think
has
it's fair for President Trump's, you know, tweeting and sort of putting them on blast, particularly someone like Andrew
No,
McCabe?
I don't. I think it's really unprofessional, and I think that it's damaging to the institution at all. I really appreciate the nuance with which you discussed this, Buck, because you said you're talking about a few individuals versus the entire entity, and we need to have faith in our intelligence communities.
Okay, but
and I would say Donald Trump got himself into trouble when he goes shorthand. That's what happened with the Jim Comey stuff when he said, you know, what is this Russia stuff? Like, Mike Flynn's a good guy.
But Kennedy,
okay,
it should give it a pause. A few of these bad actors. I mean, doesn't that taint the investigation? Because Americans do have to believe that this is being done in a nonpartisan way, that this is a fair investigation. Well, when you have such clear examples of bias.
Yeah, and Buck having worked at the CIA, I mean,
right.
He's got inside information and knowledge of how these institutions operate. You know, from what we see as people who analyze and sort of witness the fallout from these things, it is just a few bad actors, but unfortunately those actors have so much influence on not only the investigation but the outcome. You're talking about an agent who is not only involved in the Flynn questioning, the launching of the Russia probe, but also the lead investigator in the Hillary Clinton.
But we don't
That was a clearly political decision.
I agree that nuance is important,
I mean, this is one person who, at a senior level, was involved in all of these areas and is able to essentially
what he did was really...
Isn't that the problem, though? Because we are talking about a few bad actors, but we're talking about a few bad actors at the top who have had lead roles in this investigation, whether you're talking about Andrew McCabe and concerns over his wife receiving
if you talk about Strzok, though,
Bruce or at the DOJ, or you talk about Peter Strzok.
Peter Strzok is somebody who...
Isn't that a broader concern given the level that they've played in this?
Right, there's bias, and I also think when it comes to Strzok, there's some level of incompetence, because if you are literally texting proof of your impartiality to your coworker who's also your mistress, I don't know how it gets more stupid than that, quite honestly. But at the same time, you have to not let those very real concerns about bias of some individuals completely make it so that there's no concerns about Russian meddling in the election, because there are still those concerns.
Well, I would like to see a continued focus on that, but I think we've lost sight of that. And Buck, we're going to go to another topic, and I want to get your response, obviously, from your position formerly at the CAA. I want to get your response on this. So meantime, the big surprise of 2018 may not come from Robert Mueller's team, but from a previously overlooked investigation by the Justice Department's Inspector General. We're now almost a year into this Michael Horowitz's wide-ranging review of the FBI and Justice Department investigations into Hillary Clinton's private email server. Horowitz's team has been interviewing former Attorney General Loretta Lynch, former FBI Director James Comey, and other key officials. And in fact, it was the Inspector General who discovered that one of Robert Mueller's top investigators, Peter Strzok, was sharing anti-Trump texts with his mistress. Of course, those messages got Strzok booted off the team and raised credibility questions for the special counsel. So what do you make of this Inspector General investigation, and what impact does this investigation and its potential findings have on Robert Mueller's investigation?
I think it highlights a critical point in all of this, which is that people have been talking about opinions and political opinions that FBI agents, like everybody else, will have. But they have to look at that in the context of political or politicized actions, decisions that have been made that clearly had a partisan impact, that also seem to always favor one side, most notably with Hillary's emails. I am still shocked, as somebody who used to have a security clearance, that there was no criminal action taken against Hillary Clinton whatsoever. And when you look at the tarmac meeting and then James Comey stepping out in front of Loretta Lynch, in front of the whole country, those were all actions that showed a political bias. And now, after the fact, we are seeing, because of this Inspector General investigation, the sentiments that may have fed that bias, meaning the political ideas that people had. And I think as we see more of this, there'll be an understanding of the keynote, the key players.
I want to ask you something really quickly about that, because I think this is really important. It seems as though there's some sort of trust that is eroding in the special counsel. Robert Mueller came in, and both sides said this is a man of incredible integrity. The president reportedly had talked to him about potentially succeeding FBI Director James Comey and becoming FBI Director again. Is this Inspector General more capable of launching an objective investigation than the special counsel?
Well, I think in this case, the Inspector General understands that there's a crisis of confidence right now at the FBI. So that may, from a lot of the American people, I know there are people who believe that all this is nonsense, but I certainly don't.
There's a poll that came out this month that said 54%, I believe it was Harvard Cap's Harris poll, 54% of Americans think that Mueller isn't just biased, but so biased that he actually isn't able to do his job when it comes to this investigation. I think it'd be bananas to fire him, and I don't think that President Trump will. Yeah. However, it is absolute fact that the faith in this institution has eroded in the American public.
Can we get that from the Inspector General?
You're asking, you know, this is the people that are in charge of finding the truth also have personal connections to the institution, ties to the individuals involved. You're just hoping that they're ethical.
And
that's what we've been, I know, but the problem is that we've been told this about Mueller all along. We've been told this about Comey. James Comey at one point was talked about by the media as the single most trustworthy public official in American life. And since he's left office, he thinks he's like some guy who's a Zen master / Democrat operative on Twitter. It's crazy. He's clearly a partisan
as well. He's on Instagram.
To the point that
he's on Instagram.
To the point that Kat made with, you know, concern over the special counsel investigation, this feeling that there's bias there. We have Andrew McCabe rumors saying that he's going to step down from his position
when he gets his pension, which he's certainly entitled to.
But what other changes do you think need to be made at the FBI or potentially the DOJ to try to right this ship, or for Americans to once again have faith in these critical institutions?
I think that unfortunately has much less to do with what goes on at the FBI and more to do with what goes on right here on this couch and in the media. Donald Trump and Republicans are now leading a crusade to undermine the credibility of the FBI.
So they have a right to ask those questions as to whether or not investigators have been compromised.
You absolutely have the right to ask those questions, and I think that those testimonials are incredibly important. When you hear from Christopher Wray, when you hear from Rod Rosenstein, and when they say, by the way, they have complete confidence in Robert Mueller, everyone should listen to that. But what the President of the United States of America, I believe, doesn't have a right to, obviously technically he has the right, but shouldn't be doing, is to be going on his Twitter account and to be sending out his surrogates to write a narrative that doesn't exist. And going back to the first part of this conversation, you know, Andrew McCabe, has...
whose wife received $700,000 from a Clinton
But why does that mean that
who is also the governor of Virginia?
I think it is so demeaning.
But it's about ethics and the appearance. It's not about...
the appearance or the ethics. Do you think that Andrew McCabe changed his mind about something because his wife...
I don't think he changed his mind. His mind was possibly set from the beginning.
I would like to know that in a case like Hillary Clinton's email, where you did have people on both sides with deep legal expertise, specifically on national security matters, saying this is going to be a close call. I think that and I don't even think that's true, but there were people who were saying that on both sides. To have somebody whose wife is receiving a large amount of money, not just from the Democratic Party and Democrat donors,
because it was Terry McAuliffe?
Because it's Terry McAuliffe. I think that affects the at least appearance, if not the actual judgment.
Well, you can't say that someone who has dedicated their life to public service and who is respected on both sides of the aisle, which Andrew McCabe is, that he, whatever he feels, however he voted...
Why would Terry McAuliffe funnel hundreds of thousands of dollars?
You think to pay him off?
Then
okay,
I think the influence there
$39,000 to GOP candidates.
The fact that there's bias is
it doesn't sound like we're going to address this on the show on this couch right now, so we're going to move on. But we'll keep talking about it during the commercial break. Well, President Trump drawing on the expertise of members of his defense team, like Secretary James Mattis, as the commander-in-chief takes the fight to ISIS in Syria and Iraq. The terror group has lost territory at a rapid rate since the president took office 11 months ago. So what's next in the battle for national security? And is the president getting the credit he deserves for stepping up his efforts to destroy ISIS once and for all? Stay tuned.
Welcome back. President Trump claiming a major win for Americans with his historic tax reform law. But let's not also forget what's happening overseas. The U.S. military gaining ground in the fight against ISIS. Defense Department figures show the terror network has been rapidly losing territory in the first 11 months since President Trump took office. Lucas Tomlinson is live at the Pentagon with more. Lucas?
Kennedy, a top U.S. diplomat, says ISIS has lost 98% of the territory it once held. Half those losses coming since President Trump took office. Critics say the rules of engagement during the Obama administration were onerous, with some targets taking weeks to get approval from the White House.
Obama administration micromanaged the war, and what the Trump administration did was allow execution decisions to be made in accordance with the guidance that he provided. We could have accomplished our objectives through the use of overwhelming power in 3 months, not 3 years.
Today, the U.S. military says less than 1,000 ISIS fighters remain, most concentrated in a small area along the Syria and Iraq border, seen here on the map in red. ISIS at one point controlled an area the size of Ohio. A former senior director for counterterrorism in the Obama White House pushed back on any criticism the former president didn't do enough to crush ISIS.
This was a top priority. I mean, from the early days of ISIS gaining the type of territorial safe haven it gained, in particular, there was a recognition that safe haven for terrorist groups can mean terrorist plots that extend not just into the region, but into Europe or conceivably into the United States.
While ISIS has been largely defeated, it continues to call on people around the world to conduct terrorist attacks during the holidays, with a new message sprouting up just today.
ISIS became a brand, and a lot of pre-existing terrorist groups, you've seen this in the Sinai, for example, start to raise the flag of ISIS, mainly to recruit foreign fighters and other things.
In addition to ISIS, an old foe has taken root in Syria and could take on a bigger priority for the administration next year.
A lot of folks, when they think about al-Qaeda, probably still think of its center of gravity as being on that Afghanistan-Pakistan border. But I would think of the center of gravity for al-Qaeda really having shifted to Syria at this point.
ISIS has also spread to Africa and Afghanistan, where a suicide attack yesterday in Kabul killed at least 6 people. ISIS has claimed responsibility. Kennedy?
Thanks so much, Lucas. All right, let's take it out to the couch and discuss some of this. We have a foreign policy expert in our midst, Buck Sexton. So I want to talk to you about ISIS defeat and what that means, because, you know, as you heard, 11 months into the Trump administration is when a good deal of these gains were made. But what does that mean long term for the terror group? And does that mean that the 30,000 terrorists who were fighting within ISIS have now scattered and made the world less safe?
You're going to have ongoing counterinsurgency operations in Iraq and Syria in these regions for quite a long time, but the idea of the Islamic State as a state has been defeated, has been destroyed. I think it is important to point out that the Obama administration was behind on many of these issues, was very slow. The initial efforts to train a Free Syrian Army were a complete and utter debacle. The initial efforts to bring together a coalition from the United Nations. And as those failures occurred, and also as the administration was micromanaging that air war, 500,000 people, it's estimated, died in Syria. Now, a lot of that's between Assad and ISIS, and there's a tremendous amount of terrible bloodshed going on, but the Obama administration was inept at slowing that down and at defeating the Islamic State, and the Trump administration's results speak for themselves on this issue. Where does ISIS go from here? Unfortunately, the ideology is primary. It always has been. Yeah. The notion of a state was mostly a propaganda tool. They weren't going to be able to defeat all the... They weren't going to knock over the Turkish government.
It seems like, you know, the U.S. military is adept at fighting a traditional military, which ISIS has sort of formed itself into becoming. But then it sort of turns into the ether, and they go into different countries, and our country. And there are people here, there are United States citizens who are born here who self-radicalize. Do you think it's too soon for the Trump administration to be taking credit for this defeat? I mean, defeating and taking away of 98% of the territory that ISIS held is pretty stunning.
It is, absolutely, and I would recommend everyone read a column by Ross Douthat in the New York Times about this and the perils, actually, of liberals denying the success that has gone over on in Iraq and Syria vis-a-vis ISIS. And I think that the president surely can say something about this, and that he should. But to your point about this spreading, and they're here. And that's what everyone is really concerned about. I think, for those who have people in their families that are serving and are thinking about that, obviously that's front and center in their minds, but I think that people are afraid of the fact that they can walk into Times Square and there could be a suicide bomber there now, that the subway, the West Side Highway, this is things that have just happened here in New York City. It happens all over the country. So I think that the president needs to be careful to include that kind of nuance, to say we have a threat at home and these are the steps that we're taking to make sure that we can combat it, but we have had successes abroad.
Just ISIS's state-building project was largely a propaganda tool for the radicalization of people all across the globe. Now that they have lost...
Did they know it was going to fail?
I'm sure there were some fighters who thought they were going to take it all the way to Jerusalem and all the rest of the propaganda. I think most of them probably recognized that this was going to be a series of advances and retreats. But now we're in a different phase for the Islamic State. They will find another place, whether it's in the Sinai or Yemen or the Philippines. There will be a place where a statelet of sorts forms with the ISIS flag flying above it. But now we have a model to defeat it, and we have an administration that will take it seriously.
One of the things we need to address, though, as you mentioned, there's a lot of them that are already here and a lot of people who become radicalized here.
Yeah.
They get here, they're not radicalized, they become radicalized, and that's a huge part of the problem, which we haven't found a way to really deal with that one yet.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, but that ideology, countering that ideology is so critical, and it seems like it's almost impossible, and it leaves you with a sense of hopelessness. Is this administration capable of going to that next level and addressing the ideology and replacing it with something else, particularly with people who have either come here or who were born here who are dead set on murdering Americans?
Well, I think it's the realization that we're just going to continue having to combat this radical ideology, right? We're still fighting Nazism, how many decades later? And so I think the concern, if it's not ISIS, it's Al-Qaeda, it's the Taliban. And so, of course, President Trump and the Trump administration should be taking credit for their gains on the battlefield. I think it was, 50% of the 98% of the lost territory was done in the last 11 months alone. And President Trump has been credited for giving his commanders on the ground more ability, more latitude to move and to move forward in this war. But of course, there's this concern that ideology lives on, and we're going to continue as Americans having to fight this, and that's a scary thought.
All right. Well, President Trump, of course, earning praise from some unlikely sources after taking action on Russia. Democrats praising him, but what might that mean for their collusion narrative? Uh-oh. Plus, it's shaping up to be a very Merry Christmas for retail. What's getting Americans to pull out those credit cards and swipe? We'll discuss in moments. Stay right here.
All I want for Christmas is my two front teeth, my two front teeth, my two front teeth. Gee, if I could only have my two front teeth, then I could wish you Merry Christmas. It seems
Santa delivering Christmas cheer for America's retailers. The Wall Street Journal reporting that holiday retail sales are at their best pace in 6 years. And with lots of people waiting till after the Christmas rush, the shopping season still isn't over yet. Anita Vogel joins us live from her Los Angeles news desk on why the big spenders are back. Anita, why are they back?
Well, hi there, Lisa. The truth is retail spending has been going strong ever since Black Friday, since last month. And the cash registers have just continued to ring all the way up through Christmas Day. Some of the major credit card companies saying that many retailers benefited this year from Christmas Day falling on a Monday, giving shoppers that full weekend to open up their wallets for those last-minute buys. Experts add high consumer confidence and a robust job market boosted U.S. retail sales during the holiday period, rising at the best pace since 2011. According to the National Retail Federation, 7 years ago, sales were at $528 billion. Take a look at the numbers. In 2017, the estimate for this holiday season, $682 billion. A spokesperson from MasterCard says, overall, this was a big win for retail this year, with a lot of the boost coming from online shopping.
Amazon all the way.
Yeah.
Yep, 100%.
Most of it has been online. And why is that? It's easy, convenient, free shipping.
But the brick and mortar stores, for them, the days leading up to Christmas are vital. 20% of traffic into the stores during the season happens in the week before. So they did all they could to roll out the red carpet for shoppers. Retail experts also say 53% of consumers, about 126 million people, were taking part in last-minute shopping on what's being called Super Saturday. That's that last Saturday, rather, before Christmas. And it's not over yet. Stores like Walmart and Macy's, they know the bargain shoppers, some of them don't even come out until this week. So the shopping and the sales will continue all the way up until New Year's. Lisa, back to you.
Thanks, Anita. I know that I've personally contributed. Have a good one.
Me too.
Thank you.
Attention, Trump critics. The president is cracking down on the Kremlin. The administration making two moves so far that Putin doesn't like, but Democrats do. ABC News reporting Trump is expected to announce his approval of a plan to sell anti-tank missiles to Ukraine's government, which could help it fight Russia-backed rebels. And just last week, the administration sanctioned 5 Russian and Chechen people under the Magnitsky Act. It's a 2012 law that punishes alleged human rights abusers. Democrats are praising Trump. Senator Ben Cardin weighing in on Ukraine.
I support the administration's decision to provide these types of defensive weapons for the Ukrainians. It's a clear message to Russia that we will not allow them to continue to compromise the sovereignty of Ukraine.
The Daily Beast spoke with 2 other Democrats, Senators Cory Booker and Chris Coons, who both approve of how Trump is taking on Russia with those sanctions. This is all coming after former Director of National Intelligence James Clapper suggested Putin was managing Trump as an intelligence asset.
You have to remember Putin's background. He's a KGB officer. That's what they do. They recruit assets. He knows how to handle an asset, and that's what he's doing with the president.
All right, Buck, one of the most favorite Democrat talking points is that Trump is Putin's puppet. So this would mean he was like a real bad puppeteer, right?
Yeah, this is a slap in the face to the Kremlin that the Obama administration just explicitly was unwilling to do. I would note that people keep calling them defensive weapons. They're weapons. We're sending missiles. We're sending sniper rifles.
Weapons is weapons.
Yeah, weapons are weapons. But the point here being that they will be used against Russian forces, Russian paramilitaries. They're out of uniform. They're pretending to be separatists. There are some Ukrainian separatists along with them in eastern Ukraine. But Russians will get shot with these. Their tanks will get hit with these. This will upset the Kremlin. I think it's a strong move from the president. And this, alongside the Magnitsky Act sanctions, shows that Trump, if Putin thinks that he can handle Trump and make him do what he wants, he's desperately wrong. And for Democrats out there, this just goes to show that yet another one of their favorite narratives, favorite talking points has fallen away.
Jessica, is that true? To you, does it mean that just because he's doing this now as President Trump, that he wasn't involved with Russia as candidate Trump, or are those things not related, you don't think?
I think there's certainly a way to separate them, and I agree with Buck. I'm really excited about this. This is something since Russia illegally annexed Crimea 4 years ago now. This has been top of mind for a lot of people working in this field. I think it's great to be sending that in. The Magnitsky Act, which has now gone global. Everyone should read Bill Browder's book, by the way, Red Notice, which goes into that in depth, and it's fantastic. I think that Democrats can certainly keep up both narratives, and that won't be difficult whatsoever. What happened on the campaign trail, and a lot of people don't even think that it was Donald Trump himself who knew what was going on, but that it were key players around him where they can talk about Mike Flynn. There are a lot of people who are saying something, there might be an indictment for Jared Kushner, maybe even for Don Jr., Paul Manafort, etc. So I think that you can definitely keep both of them.
At this point, I mean, there may be unicorns that fall out of the sky and power our Bentleys.
They could go under
when
Nancy
those
Pelosi's
things happen,
taxes.
then they will have happened. I understand that the special counsel has extraordinary reach. I also have said this entire time that this campaign, because it was so unorthodox, which was what was most intoxicating for a lot of voters in this country who felt completely marginalized by identity politics and the archaic two-party system, they liked that unorthodoxy, but so did people like Paul Manafort, who were essentially self-serving power brokers who were using whatever leverage they could to enrich themselves.
Lisa,
and also like Russia.
And also the Russia-Trump collusion narrative took a big hit when we found out that the DNC and Hillary Clinton were funding the unverified dossier that the FBI just recently said that they can't verify. So that took a big hit when we found out that they were paying Kremlin sources for information, which has spearheaded a lot of the Russia narrative. And also, you look at President Obama and him bowing and kowtowing to Russia on issues like Syria, telling Russia that there's more room after the election for issues like missile defense. So it's not like President Obama really took a strong stance against Russia.
President Obama isn't president anymore. Hillary Clinton isn't president. Donald Trump is president, and there's plenty of evidence that he was kowtowing to Putin during the campaign, and since he got into office, he loves to be loved by Vladimir Putin.
Well, it looks as though we're almost not going to be able to get to all agree on this before the commercial break. All right, the Trump administration taking on the United Nations, announcing members have agreed to budget cut President Trump's been hinting at for months. So, is the president spearheading long overdue reform at the UN?
The Trump administration announcing that the United Nations has agreed to cut $285 million from the UN budget next year. This after just last week, more than 100 countries voted to condemn President Trump's decision to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. Both President Trump and U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said there would be consequences for that.
While the United Nations on a regular budget has increased by 140%, and its staff has more than doubled since 2000, we are not seeing the results in line with this investment.
We have an obligation to demand more for our investment. And if our investment fails, we have an obligation to spend our resources in more productive ways.
Tough yet eloquent. Lisa Boothe, I want to ask you, has Nikki Haley emerged as the biggest star in this administration?
I mean, I love her. Who doesn't love her? I mean, Jessica, I know you, even as a Democrat, have praised Nikki Haley. I mean, look, I think she's got future ambitions to, run for president in the future. She's got governor under her belt, did a great job as governor of South Carolina, and now having this with foreign policy experience. And really just being a force for this administration and standing up to some of these other nations as UN ambassador. I mean, I can't see how she doesn't have such a bright future for the Republican Party in the future.
How useless is the UN, Buck?
Oh, it's so useless. And I love that there's finally consequences since we've seen that the UN or that the member nations of the UN at the General Assembly are willing to try and tell us where we should put our embassy. And when you juxtapose that against all of the resolutions from the United Nations condemning Israel, versus all the other countries in the world, this place needs a wake-up call. The United Nations needs a proverbial shot across the bow, and I think cutting a couple $100 million out of the budget is a good start.
I think it's worse than useless. I think it's
harmful.
I think it can be harmful. I think a lot of it is uselessness. I think it's a lot of hanging out and eating lunches or whatever they do over there. I think there's a lot of that going on. We're buying a lot of lunches, but I think that also the more we get involved in the UN, the more we get involved in other countries' drama, which can in the end hurt us without really benefiting us. And we're spending so much money, more than 20% of its whole budget. It's us, and what are we getting? Worst money ever that we've spent. Lunches.
It's a big
for other
world.
people.
I love you've got to be the contrarian here. You love the UN.
I mean, I do enjoy a good international institution. I will admit that. But no, I think that it is smart. I don't agree with the rhetoric that necessarily goes along with how President Trump presents this. We're paying too much for it. We need to get more in return. But
I think that's fair.
Listen, for me, it is 90% of the time what really gets me is the delivery of it and the kind of crassness that goes with that. When you're standing next to other NATO leaders and just kind of, pointing your finger, or Nikki Haley saying you can't come to our party because you voted against us. That's not how I initially would do it.
But then how do you meter out consequences? If we are a sovereign nation and, we have decided, all right, this guy says he's going to make America great again. We're going to give him some level of a mandate, particularly on foreign policy. How else do you
I think that
demand
there
those
is, as we
consequences?
talk about with entitlement reform as well, I think that some degree of means testing has to come into play with these organizations where you say, these are the targets that are supposed to be set. If we're giving you this amount of aid, or if we're giving you this amount of
They've already
assistance.
fallen
is what
short.
you're-
I kind of agree, but I also kind of don't
Okay,
care.
great.
I agree that he could have been nicer about it. I don't really agree with the reasoning
That's a
for it.
hashtag
But if we're
thing.
going to save that much money, which is, by the way, our money that's being wasted, then I kind of don't care.
I love saving money. It's
Me
really the
too.
best thing ever.
I don't do it.
You don't
That's
save
not
money?
shocking.
Well, you don't have to. Let's go spend some more of
Millennial,
it.
whatever.
We're going to go spend our money during the break. More Outnumbered in just a moment. Stay put. All right, thanks so much to Buck Sexton. Buck, what was the best thing you got for Christmas?
We don't do gifts in my family.
Oh, that's
I feel like I've
gross.
been exposed.
Buy yourself something.
We just go to church at midnight mass. We don't do gifts because we're all adults. There's no kids. When we
You're
have
going
kids,
on
then they'll be-
vacation soon, right?
I'm going to the beach tomorrow.
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
that.
that's
So
a
that's
gift
how I
that keeps-
celebrate.
That's a
Christmas.
gift.
Absolutely.
Good enough.
All right. Well, we are back tomorrow at noon Eastern right here, bringing you so much delightful news. You'll be sick of delight if that's ever possible. America's News headquarters starts right now. Have a beautiful day.